I once bought a strange crystal box from a street vendor, and to my shock, I discovered that inside it existed an entire miniature cultivation world, and at first I thought it was just some kind of advanced projection toy, but everything changed the moment I casually threw a lobster into it, and it turned into a supreme medicine that shook an entire region. And when I dropped a tiny toy sword inside, it transformed into a divine weapon capable of sealing the land itself, and in the eyes of the people inside that world, I was like an all-encompassing heaven. Yet the irony was that in reality, I was nothing more than a cancer patient with less than 3 months left to live. So that day, I ordered a 388 yuan lobster and sat down to properly study this crystal projection box, and as soon as I flipped the switch, a vast desert appeared before me, and within it, I could barely make out a tiny moving figure, so I grabbed a magnifying glass and focused, and only then did I realize it was a young girl, her body covered in wounds as 2 fierce black wolves chased her relentlessly, and in desperation, she pointed behind her as a flying sword shot out like a streak of light toward the wolves, but they easily dodged it, then pounced on her and knocked her to the ground, biting into her without hesitation, and the realism of the projection was so intense that I couldn't bear to watch. But then I suddenly remembered what the old man had said, that this projection could actually interact with reality. So without thinking too much, I picked up 2 toothpicks and dropped them into the box. And from her perspective, those toothpicks fell from the sky like divine pillars, instantly piercing through the 2 wolves that were barely millimeters in size, killing them on the spot. And the girl, Guingan, was completely shocked as she hurriedly looked around. But all she could see was the barren land, and with no time to think, she quickly took out a medicinal pill and sat cross-legged to heal herself. And after about 15 minutes, she regained some strength and cautiously approached the 2 massive wooden pillars, my toothpicks. And as she stared at the dead demon wolves, a chill ran down her spine as she murmured with respect, "This power must belong to a great expert. I am Guingan, disciple of the kingly sect, and I thank you, senior, for your help." But of course, after saying it twice, there was no response, because at that exact moment, the so-called senior she was thanking was just me, opening my door to pick up the 388 yuan food delivery, and when I returned to my room with that luxurious box of lobster, just as I was about to start eating, I suddenly noticed the tiny figure inside the crystal box kneeling in front of the toothpicks, saying something, so I leaned in closer and finally heard her clearly as she said, "Thank you, senior, for your help. Please, senior, retrieve your treasure to prevent it from being stolen by others." And I couldn't help but chuckle because to me, they were just 2 toothpicks. Yet this interactive effect of the projection was truly unbelievable, and it even generated its own story automatically. So I didn't pay it much attention and continued eating while watching her, thinking to myself that even though she was tiny, she was actually quite beautiful. Meanwhile, Guingan anxiously circled around the toothpicks, but soon she stumbled and collapsed helplessly onto the ground, as she hadn't eaten anything for half a month, and her cultivation was only at the 13th layer of qi refinement. Not enough to practice fasting, so her gaze slowly shifted toward the corpse of the demon wolf, and in order to survive, she no longer cared about anything else as she cut off a piece of the wolf's flesh and brought it to her mouth. But the overwhelming stench nearly made her vomit, yet she forced herself to swallow it just to stay alive, and watching this scene left me completely stunned. So without thinking, I gently placed the lobster claw I was holding next to her in the box, and from her perspective, a massive red object suddenly descended from the sky, shaking the ground several times as she stared at it in disbelief and said, "What kind of demon beast claw is this? It's so huge!" And at that moment, a voice echoed in her heart, my voice, as I simply said, "Eat." And she quickly looked around but saw no one. Yet she immediately understood that the senior had helped her once again, and with gratitude she said, "Thank you, senior." And just from the fragrance alone, she felt her strength returning, so she cautiously activated her flying sword and tried to cut into the claw. But all that could be heard was a metallic clang before her sword shattered instantly, leaving not even a scratch on the claw, and she stared at the broken pieces of her sword with tears in her eyes, because her sect wasn't wealthy, and that flying sword had been painstakingly forged for her by her master through countless sacrifices. And meanwhile, I just watched her with great interest, thinking to myself that this 308 yuan was absolutely worth it, especially seeing her expression as if she was about to cry. Everything felt too real, so I decided to open the lobster claw just to see how that tiny girl would react. And as I moved, she suddenly heard my voice and I said, "Step back." And she looked up in confusion only to see a massive golden hand descending from the sky out of nowhere, effortlessly grabbing the demon beast claw before cracking it open with a crisp sound. And then that golden hand slowly faded away into the air as I calmly told her, "Eat." And at that moment, Guingan's mind fell into complete chaos because she already thought I was strong, but she never imagined I could be this powerful. And as she stared at the exposed white meat, she couldn't resist anymore and began devouring it without caring about her image at all, and watching her eat so greedily somehow made my own appetite better too. But then I suddenly noticed something strange. The amount of shrimp meat in my box had decreased, and I frowned, thinking, how could a shadow possibly make food disappear? So I looked again at the 2 toothpicks still stained with the wolf's blood and muttered to myself, "No, this isn't right. This is too absurd." And a disturbing thought crossed my mind. Could it be that my cancer cells had spread to my brain and were causing hallucinations? I ran my hand through my hair and decided to test this theory, so I carefully observed the environment inside the box and realized that the entire scene was always centered around the girl, and I couldn't see anything beyond a certain distance, which made me wonder if this projection could only display things within about 300 meters around her. But just as I was still thinking, I suddenly noticed the ground starting to move, as if something was rapidly approaching her from beneath the sand, and I immediately warned her, "Be careful." And Guingan, who had already lost one arm, heard my voice and instinctively grabbed her broken sword, cautiously scanning her surroundings. But all she could see was endless yellow arimal swirling in the distance, until suddenly something burst forward. It was a wild sandworm, and she was shocked as she muttered, "A sandworm, aren't they usually dormant? Why has it suddenly awakened?" And then she seemed to realize something and glanced at the red claw behind her. But in that brief moment of distraction, the nearly 20-meter-long sandworm was already right in front of her, opening its mouth filled with terrifying fangs, and without hesitation, she gripped her broken flying sword and leaped forward to attack first. But the sandworm didn't even take her seriously, and yet in that instant, the remaining half of her broken sword pierced straight into its brain, causing it to writhe violently in pain. And watching this unfold made me even more anxious, until my eyes suddenly landed on the lighter sitting on my table. So I quickly grabbed it and dismantled the piezoelectric igniter, then shouted again, "Move away!" And as soon as Guingan heard my voice, she let the sandworm fling her away. And in that very moment, the world inside the box changed dramatically as the once clear sky was suddenly swallowed by demonic winds and dark clouds, completely blotting out the sun, and the sandworm raised its head in terror, trembling as it tried to escape, but the overwhelming energy in the sky gave it no chance at all, and then a terrifying cyan thunder tore through the heavens, splitting sky and earth as it struck down mercilessly onto the sandworm. And moments later, the dark clouds dispersed and sunlight returned, leaving behind a deep crater that told the story of what had just happened. And as I looked at that tiny figure who had just been struck by my lightning, I let out a sigh of relief and asked, "Are you okay?" And she immediately replied, "I'm fine. Thank you so much, Senior, for saving my life. This Junior has no way to repay you. If the Senior has any request, this Junior will surely comply. Anything is fine." "Yes, anything." And hearing that, I asked, "Do you still have a flying sword?" And she hesitated for a moment before saying, "My flying sword has already been destroyed, but I still have a wooden flying sword my master gave me for practice. Does the Senior need it?" And I simply said, "Yes, give it to me." So she quickly searched through her storage pouch and took out a wooden sword, but since she didn't know how to hand it to me, she carefully inserted it into the ground and said respectfully, "Senior, this is a practice flying sword made by my master. It has a set of sword control formations engraved on it and is inlaid with spirit stones, so even ordinary people can use it. It is used to practice sword control." And as I looked at that flying sword, which was thinner than a strand of hair from my perspective, I realized I couldn't possibly grab it with my hand. So carefully, I used the lobster claws as tools and extended them into the glass box. And at that moment, from her perspective, 2 enormous metal pillars suddenly descended from the sky and gently picked up the wooden sword she had placed on the ground. This completely left Guingan stunned, and I could tell from her expression that she was thinking the same thing. This Senior seems unwilling to reveal himself. Could it be that he has some indescribable difficulty? Meanwhile, I carefully picked up that tiny wooden sword into my hand and examined it closely, and at that same moment, her voice echoed again from inside the box as she said, "Senior, this world inside the box, it is indeed real. May I take these beast claws with me? My fellow disciples have been surrounded by semi-demons for nearly a year. They won't be able to hold on much longer." And hearing that, I said calmly, "Explain everything to me in detail." So Guingan respectfully began telling me the whole story. And as I listened, I finally understood that her master had established the kingly sect in that barren land. But not long ago, a massive demon invasion descended upon them, nearly destroying the entire sect. And it was only thanks to the Silu sect of the Great Wasteland joining forces that they barely managed to resist the semi-demons. But who would have thought that those semi-demons would suddenly change their tactics, surrounding the entire kingly sect and cutting off all incoming resources, intending to starve them to death, and Guingan had been sent out to request reinforcements. And even if that failed, she had to at least bring back supplies. And after hearing all of this, I nodded slightly and said, "Take it. If it's not enough, I still have more here." And she immediately replied with gratitude, "It's enough, it's enough. My storage can't even handle that much meat. The spiritual energy inside it is abundant, and it can strengthen the body like a spiritual pill. With this spiritual meat, it will be enough for us to repel those semi-demons." And as I watched, she took out a storage bag covered in runes and waved her hand toward the lobster claw I had given her. And in an instant, the massive claw disappeared into her bag. Then she paused and said awkwardly, "Ah, it's already full. Senior?" I was still preparing to take more. I didn't expect the space to be so small. And then she hesitated slightly before asking, "Senior, I'm preparing to return to the sect. Would you like to come and take a look?" But I shook my head and said, "I still have matters to deal with. We'll talk about it later." So she respectfully cupped her hands and said, "Then Guingan will take her leave first. If the senior has time, the kingly sect will always welcome you." And after saying that, she mounted her horse and rode deep into the vast desert, while I stood outside the crystal box watching her figure move. And just as I expected, as Guingan moved, the scenery inside the box also shifted along with her, always keeping her at the center. And elsewhere, beneath the kingly mountain, countless dark shadows surrounded the sect over and over again, while beams of light floated around the mountain and flashes of lightning occasionally leaped through the air. That was the great protective formation of the kingly sect, the 5 lightning extermination formation. And although the demon race couldn't break through it for a long time, they continued their siege, slowly exhausting the cultivators inside. And at the center of the demon camp, a wolf-headed human-bodied demon stood anxiously. It was the leader of the semi-demon race, the Black Wolf, and he said with frustration, "I said it from the beginning, the resources of our great wasteland are already scarce, and yet we still have to fight humans. We're all poor. If we rob humans, will we really become rich?" And another voice agreed, "Exactly. If this continues, I don't know whether the humans will collapse first, but our semi-demons will definitely suffer heavy losses." And just at that moment, an old man suddenly appeared in the center of the camp, and someone immediately asked, "Demon race, why aren't you attacking, sir?" And the wolf-headed leader replied, "That sect's protective formation is too powerful. We can't break it, we can only wear them down." But the old man snorted coldly and said, "I think it's because you don't want to." And instantly, a terrifying pressure spread out, making all the surrounding semi-demons unable to breathe as they trembled and muttered in shock. Nascent soul. A nascent soul monster. Such power. How could someone like this come here, sir? And the wolf-headed leader quickly said, "Please calm your anger. You may not know this, but the other sects fear that after we destroy Kingly Sect, we will attack them next, so they have all gathered at Kingly Sect to resist us together. And although the sects of the Great Wasteland are small individually, once united, their strength cannot be underestimated." But the old man dismissed it with a cold laugh and said, "A bunch of chickens and dogs. But it doesn't matter. The Supreme Elder has basically stabilized things. Now it's time to free up our hands and deal with these disobedient ones." And then, almost as if lamenting fate itself, a voice muttered bitterly, "What sin have I committed? These are matters of you humans. Why must we semi-demons get involved?" The old man's voice echoed coldly, "But you are still useful. At least you can keep this place surrounded and prevent anyone from escaping." And one of the semi-demons immediately replied, "Actually, One woman already escaped, but sir, don't worry, I've already sent people to chase and kill her." And hearing that, the old man's expression changed as he quickly took out a painting, and on it was Guingan, and he asked sharply, "Her? Is it her?" And they nodded. "Yes, yes." But just at that moment, a small wolf demon rushed in, panicked, and reported, "Lord of Demons, the companions who went to chase that human, they're all dead." And instantly the atmosphere froze as someone shouted, "What? Did she escape?" But the demon replied, "No, that woman has already returned." And the wolf-headed leader sneered, "Then I'll kill her myself." But the old man raised his hand and said calmly, "No, let her return, so she can be sent to the west together with her sect master." And someone hesitated and said, "But the kingly sect used all their strength to break through our siege just to seek help. What if they bring back a powerful ally?" And the old man chuckled coldly. What powerful ally could possibly compare to the Daoshuan sect? The Daoshuan sect is the #1 sect of the Central Plains, the leader of the Righteous Alliance. And when the wolf-headed black wolf heard this, his expression changed drastically as he muttered in shock, "I knew this senior was terrifying, but I didn't expect his background to be this frightening. How did a small sect like Kingly provoke the Daoshuan sect?" And even he couldn't understand how a girl who hadn't even reached the foundation establishment stage could cause a nascent soul powerhouse to personally hunt her down. And instinctively, he felt it was better not to know the truth behind this. While back in my room, something even more unbelievable was happening right in front of me. The small wooden sword I had placed on the table suddenly trembled slightly, and then, right before my eyes, it slowly expanded, growing larger and larger until it became a 3-foot-long wooden sword engraved with mysterious runes, and I stood there stunned as I picked it up, feeling how incredibly light it was in my hand, and even more strangely, there was a faint warmth coming from it. But then a question hit me. How do I even use this thing? So I tried imagining the sword lifting into the air, and the moment that thought formed in my mind, the sword trembled lightly before slowly leaving my hand and floating in the direction I imagined, gliding gently across my room, and I quickly willed it to return, my heart pounding wildly as it flew back into my grasp. And in that instant, a realization struck me so hard it almost made me dizzy. The things I take out from the box can actually be used in the real world, which meant maybe I wasn't doomed after all. Maybe I wouldn't die, because if I could bring out cultivation pills from that world, then maybe I could cure my illness. And I forcefully suppressed the surge of excitement in my chest, telling myself to calm down, because there was still one thing I needed to confirm: the true identity of that old man who sold me this box. So I quickly washed up and prepared to head into the city to find him. And before leaving, I took one last look at the crystal box on my